jumped ahead a little bit, not much. It's 12:15 now. And the Confederate turn, I pretty much ran through the noon turn. McLaws is now active again. And that means Lee may want to consider issuing some orders to Longstreet once again. Longstreet's command is a little beaten up, but he's got another, not a division here, but another brigade for Hood. And I'm thinking, again, attempt that outflank, maybe not as far as I was going to try to outflank Seminary Ridge, because with Hill going to move. Now the question is, how do I want to time this? I could just send orders to Hood, or to Longstreet, and that'll all work, and maybe they'll coordinate, and the delay on Hill will be as long as it takes, for the orders to reach Longstreet. Longstreet's not exactly the swiftest actor in this game either. He's sitting on a 0 command rating, so he's not going to do much either. Alternatively, I could put a trigger on it, but triggers in this game don't work very well. That may have been what was intended in the old CWB stuff. It didn't allow you to, do anything to kind of circumvent the triggering. So here, a trigger means, well, I don't even get to roll for the activity until the other unit starts moving. And that would be painful, as likely to be a disorganized attack as just sending the orders out. There are other kind of cheap ways that I've worked around this in CWB, but they're probably cheating, so I'm not going to go ahead with them here, and I'm beginning to look at them in a different light in that, okay, I've been far too capable of coordinating attacks in either CWB or NBS, and it may just be my reading of the rules. For example, I would give orders like, move up to Hill's command and coordinate as his left flank, or right flank in this case, on any attacks he happens to make. Well, that's just BS in terms of, it seems like a perfectly reasonable order. Hey, you're attached to this, sort of like you would attach a brigade, and I want you to provide this role in that position. Well, I'm beginning to think that that's just cheating. That's circumventing the attempts the orders have to make things, the orders rules have to make things not able to be coordinated. And it feels all the more likely here because there's this restriction against doing timed orders or this, that, or the other. Therefore, I am coming to that conclusion that I've cheated all along with the gamer's order writing. Pushing through the 12:30 turn, not a whole hell of a lot has happened in actual game terms, but in terms of some kind of neat things have happened in terms of the mechanisms of the play. For one thing, I got rid of my counter tray. Nothing to do with the rules itself, but all my reinforcements are on the board. I put my replacement leaders down here in this tray. That's kind of nice. I've got the rest, third day, all comes in before noon, so I was able to put them in. And then you see these piles of artillery here. The gun wagons have gotten close enough that I could commit to recharging all my guns, and I just, moved everything from the 2nd Corps and 3rd Corps, for the most part, that had been kind of waiting for ammo. It's kind of neat because this thing, I ended up using one this round, has 164 shell, and 82 canister. I feel like I'm pretty good for the rest of the battle at this point with the Union. We had been tight on ammo early in the battle because 1st and 11th Corps sharing one wagon. No one else has any. But now, 12th Corps got its, 2nd Corps got its, and the biggie is that huge reserve is on the board. The Confederate reserve is tiny comparatively. Longstreet, for example, has larger ammo supplies than, well, all the Corps have larger individual ammo supplies than that. It's kind of weird, this tracing, running off the map, getting supplies, running back. It doesn't take that much longer game time it takes longer playing time to run all the way back there and get supplies off map than it does to kind of record how long you're going to take to resupply from on-map sources. It's just more of a pain in the butt, but kind of cool to watch them rolling out there. It reminds me of TSS, where, you know, the Army supply train, everything ran to it. There was no core. The core supplies were just for small arms in that game. Anyway, we got a huge pile of those here. Other than that, not much. We've been doing some long-range plinking. One kind of neat thing, the Union decided enough of that long-range plinking, because they have the artillery disadvantage locally here, 2nd Corps versus Longstreet. So they pulled behind this wood line so that they can't be seen anymore, and they're setting up, you know, basically you break through here, you're up Schitt's Creek. Now, Longstreet's orders, which I've written, are not in regard to that. Meade's been writing orders too. He's been trying to position those artillery, stuff like that. 5th Corps, we already discussed what their orders are. He's pretty much run out of things that he feels like he has to do, and now the question is, well, can I get myself in danger by writing orders I shouldn't necessarily do? So, for example, 1st Corps, do I want to pull them back to Cemetery Hill? I think probably. That opens up a little bit of a gap here, a gap through Gettysburg. That's pretty well defended right now. But on the other hand, any kind of huge outflank I'll be in preparation for. I'm a little worried about this flank over here. Once 5th Corps leaves it, it's just the 11th holding that. That's really the weak point in my army. But I've got another corps coming on soon, don't I? Not too soon. 6th Corps is coming on over here. They'll be able to take up an important position like that soon, I believe. Because if 5th Corps is covering back here, it's going to be tough for Longstreet to get through. And right now, these guys are not active. And I know that as the Union. And I know that those guys are. Should I? I don't know. That could be hidden information, and that would be kind of helpful to keep that information hidden. So maybe I shouldn't be using it. I wanted to take a note. I think in the last video, maybe it was at the beginning of this one, I went into a bit of a diatribe about how I used to handle moving. You know, you could attach one, back in the CWB system, essentially one division to another, or one corps to another in an operation, and that I feel like maybe I was cheating with that. On the counter side of that, though, if you can't do things like that, certainly you can attach brigades and stuff like that in divisions even in CWB. But if you can't do stuff like that, I've got this little unit here, Black's Detachment, which has to operate under its own orders as far as I can tell under this particular game. Now, it is absolutely useless on its own. It is a tiny little unit of 2 cavalry, each 2 strength point rifles, and a little artillery unit. If I can't attach that to some other actions, it's just going to get itself wiped out. I mean, for example, if it has its own orders to go march out and, you know, go support attacks on here or whatever, and I'm not even sure I can write those kind of support orders anymore, it's probably going to march out there and very quickly be in a bad position. So there's got to be some contingency available for something like that. And once I see that and start making that claim, then I have a feeling of, well, why is there no need, you know, why can't I do contingency orders on bigger formations? Why can't I say, all right, you know, 3rd Corps is going to attack here. 1st Corps, I'm going to give them orders to support 3rd Corps' attack on the right flank, and that's what I used to do all the time, and it allowed me a tremendous degree of coordination. Now, you could maybe say, well, there should be limitations as to the size you can do that on or whatever, and, you know, I have to agree, there may be some compromise solution here, but the way my mind sees things is in black and white, unless that's very spelled out. it's hard for me to cope with that. So, my solution was, well, if I can write contingency orders for separate commands, then I can write them for big commands, and that allows me to coordinate everything really perfectly. And I don't know quite what to do about it, because obviously, I can just limit myself and say, well, it's a little unit that I could attach. It's not a core. But you got some pretty big units getting attached in some cases, in the sense of a couple of brigades being attached to Pickett's charge and stuff like that. So, I don't know. Into that particular case. Brigades being attached. Now, over in the CWB system, you could attach brigades directly to another division, or even detach a division in some cases to another corps. You had some, in different games, you had some flexibility. There's nothing like that here. It may be superfluous under their view of the rules, in the sense that I can write specific orders to these units. The detachment and attachment rules were a source of confusion to people. I found no problem, coming to my own solution. But you can see, my own solutions may not be in accordance with, what the designer intended, and may not be in accordance with what another player intends. So when rules are written kind of on the fly, so that you can make decisions on the fly as to how to interpret them, when they're not really nailed down. And I have to say, Dean is not, at least in these tactical games, he hasn't been particularly good at nailing down every issue. I'm fine with that. But I could see, if you're walking into, a convention to play this, who does that? Well, it's done at Consim World Expo. People get together to play these games. I could see where you run into a real issue with debating how the rules are to be interpreted. Obviously, resources like Consim World's forums are a good place for sort of the community to come to a consensus of how to handle things, but that consensus may not agree with every person, and some people may be intransigent about it. I could see myself being so. But without that sort of, community support or whatever, which didn't exist in the early days so much, you're left with kind of okay, what the fuck do I do, right? And that's kind of the case here. So anyway, when we move to this, though, when we move to the line of battle system, and the Gettysburg does not have, as far as I recall, I know I looked at the series rules for this, I don't remember there being anything in the Last Chance for Victory rules allowing special, there's some special detachments early in the game, like Rhodes having, units that are not really under him at times and stuff like that. But those are just first day. Once you get out of the first day, you don't have any kind of special rules to, say, handle the attachment of a couple of brigades to Pickett's division. And that's a big deal. It really is. Because this is a historical event that really could not be simulated within the core rules of the system. The best you could do is give those individual orders, the way the system, because there's no attachment rules, to operate. And maybe they get to start rolling their acceptance once Pickett starts moving. That seems significantly weaker than the concept of attachment. And if you couldn't do the conditional orders, the supportive orders or whatever, like I'm doing with Black's detachment, and there's no provision for them in the rules, you can't simulate that. You just can't. And that to me, that's problematic. On the other hand, the question is, how much am I violating the intention if I do allow for orders to be supportive in that way? I've always allowed it in CWB because the alternatives seemed like they would break real conditions that happened. And here, I feel like there's a stronger stance in the game against that. Anyway, lots of chattering, no playing, right? Yeah. There's not much to show on the board right now, but I'm also not running through time, running out the clock while there's nothing happening, which would help me advance further into the game and actually get it done. It is 1 p.m. and the game's starting up again. Hill took his orders and he's starting to move some forces now. I assigned things kind of funny. Heath is going to march down and take the flank there. The idea being, hey, that's going to mainly be Longstreet's side. Anderson, who's way back here, is supposed to take the central position with the Union screened behind those woods and such not. That's going to be kind of a brutal, you jump across, you got to succeed. Anderson's division is probably in the best shape, so the most likely to actually make the closing and be able to actually engage. The only exception is over here with this orchard. We'll be able to fire through that. And I gave Pender the orders to take the seminary itself and the area near there. Then once they take the ridge, they're supposed to continue on for Cemetery Hill. That's the orders I gave them. Remember, those orders were written back when 2nd Corps was smashing into Culp's Hill and Longstreet was up on the ridge already. I'm going to have to make an initiative roll to actually engage at Seminary Ridge. The plan was that Seminary Ridge would be empty. Pender has already moved forward and started firing, but I think he probably shouldn't even be able to have done what he did without making that roll. He did make his achieve orders roll, though, which is something that Anderson didn't. And this again puts me in this kind of weird shape. Is this a move order followed by an attack order, in which case Anderson should be allowed to, form up in column and start marching? I think that's actually the case. So the truth of the matter then is that Pender has his attack orders, Heath has his attack orders. I got to move some of those Anderson troops. I'll get them moving around behind Pender. There, he's creating something of a roadblock. Weakness of 3rd Corps is showing up here after all its fighting that it's been doing, that it did early in the first day. That it did in the first day, and then I don't think it was forced back in the second day, early on. But anyway, Pender's taking some shots here, and you can see one unit routed. It's wrecked units trying to attack. This doesn't really bode at all well. They were meant as something of a diversionary attack, not to be the main force, but now they're becoming what really amounts to the only Confederates attacking, but also probably one of the major areas of resistance that the Confederates are going to attack. When I foresee what they're going to do, Longstreet's going to be pushing down to here and against. That looks a lot weaker than what Hill's going to be hitting. And it's just getting worse because 5th Corps took up its orders, and you can see now they've formed up into a bunch of columns, just division by division, actually brigade by brigade, moving in column to try to get up onto Seminary Ridge. If they can get there before Longstreet starts his attack, that's pretty much doomed to failure as well, because I'm foreseeing that it's going to run along this line here, and it's going to be not easy to make the kind of attack I was foreseeing with Longstreet. Beat up or not, the Union position up here was not terribly good, and Pender being beat up or not, Pender was able to push some of those units aside. You can see the routes, etc. Basically got some rear attacks by just being kind of exposed up on this hill. Being able to knock a unit out of the way, was able to get some flank attacks in. Not a lot really happening. The engagement up here is kind of desultory. I mean, the Pender's units are not in good shape, and they're not really able to advance, so they're kind of just trading fire. And you can see the 3rd Corps is not, at least what's facing them, wasn't great stuff to begin with, and it's taken some hits, so some of the units are falling back. Mainly, the effective stuff here is the artillery batteries that have been parked within effective range. This is actually how artillery works in this game. You park it 5 or 6 hexes behind, and your line, or behind the engagement location. 5 is great because then you get even fire at it, and then you just kind of plow your way through. But the problem, of course, is I'm not using my artillery for counter battery fire, which means the Union guns are going to be able to do the same, and we're not going to make any advances that way. Pender actually came close to calling off his part of the attack, which, Anderson's not in place. Heath is almost in the location I'm sorry, he's down here, is almost right about ready to start his attack. And I can't call him off and wait until Anderson attacks. It's, there's no... Again, this is my interpretation of how the rules are written. I used to have this kind of feeling with CWB, and then I ended up kind of tweaking my understanding of the rules to allow a more flexible command order structure, where, say, Heath would have waited for the rest of Hill's attack to deploy. I would have allowed that center attack to take first precedence, rather than, oh yeah, I'm where I need to be and I have my acceptance of my orders, I can go. Well, there's nothing there. I mean, there's 2 tiny brigades that are just, they weren't tiny to begin with. There used to be 4 brigades. What's left is 2 really hosed units. 2 hosed brigades. The regiments are just tiny in them. Much as over here, Scales' unit, there's a whole bunch of units in there. I think there's 4 units in the stack, but they each have like 1 or 2 strength points. So there's only a 6-point stack there. About the size of a normal unit, a normal regiment. And I can't advance, adjacent to the enemy because everything's wrecked. So I'm just sitting there kind of plinking away. The frustration that was evident in my voice about not being able to do things. Don't get me wrong there. That's what I love about these games. I love the fact that they actually represent a situation that's believable. That commanders don't just do what the god above their high commanding general orders. That they have limitations and restraints and constraints on what they can and will do. And to whatever degree that the game manages at. This system, the LOB in general, seems to do a better job of that than the CWB did in many ways. Combat is more deadly, it's more pronounced. Another thing to note about closing. Hey, that's close combat. That's the charge version in CWB, right? Once you're in 1 hex here, you're in that close combat situation in a CWB game. So don't expect, your crap to get that close. My perception of the system's advantage to the attack, as well as at least where ground is not really a factor. Obviously, hitting something like Cemetery Hill with layers of defensive artillery and infantry behind the first rank of infantry, that's hellish, Even Culp's was impossible. The unit just wore out. But anyway, my perception of the superiority of attack, Meade wrote himself some orders for 5th Corps to launch an attack up to get as far as Pitzer's Wood up here. Really branching way off of what Gettysburg is like, as now the Union's actually pushing beyond Seminary Ridge, sort of pursuing the Confederate forces. I think a flank attack here would be incredibly effective. I don't think that Longstreet can sustain it. Obviously, Hill's up to something. I want to intercept and hit that attack as it's happening, and disrupt it some more. I'm probably going to issue more orders. Quite possibly 1st Corps is going to get launched up against Pender there to try to take up around Schultz's Woods up here, and really establish myself over on Seminary. And that will cut the lines of communication between the 2nd Corps and the rest of the Army of Northern Virginia, which I see as valuable, because I am a little worried about 2nd Corps hitting here. Now, I have 6th Corps coming in. 2nd Corps has been paralyzed so far because of those attack failures, the fluke stoppages. And I could see a press moving up to McPherson's Ridge and the line going out. Well, I'm going to have Warfield, so I'm going to be swinging this way once that attack takes place. Meade's got a much tighter turn radius than Lee does because of the order delivery. He's considered normal, which means his orders take 2 turns more than the range, whereas Lee's considered not so sure. His orders take 4 turns. Add to that the fact, although Lee's a little better at coming up with orders, he's a little slower at actually implementing them. Add to that the fact that there's more dispersion in terms of the Confederate forces are stretched more over a greater territory. Part of that is I'm not doing the stupid fishhook, which is terrible. It's very hard to order units down here and units up here to do anything. Of course, if you're on defense, that's not that big a deal. But in terms of positioning, it's bad too. You want something like this arc here. And that's just, me being, my kind of military thinking is, okay, look, yes, the terrain favors this kind of positioning if you're unwilling to take an attack. But if you can get Seminary Ridge, now you've got a certain, I like to use the go term @J, on the position down here in the gully, just like I had one against the territory south of Gettysburg. And I want to use that. So I find myself being pulled into more and more attacks as it goes, because the attacks are successful. Lulls, and we're kind of in one now, even though there's some action going on here and the potential for operations. But really, no more units are moving. 5th Corps is in place. 3rd Corps for the Confederates is in place. Nothing's really moving about. This was a short turn. I timed the Union turn. It took me 5 minutes for the Union player turn. That includes the fires here. There's almost nothing going on, but I would say the majority of the game is actually kind of this faster play because it's hard to get units moving. And as long as you're just lightly engaged, there isn't a whole hell of a lot to do. That's kind of nice. Obviously, for me, I like to be able to speed through. And I think it does do a good job of reflecting the reality. It may be a little harder than would seem historically accurate, but the combat may be a little bit more condensed in terms of the amount of, during the close action, the amount of casualties, etc., is fairly high compared to other games, at least. I don't know. Overall, I'm feeling, though, that I'm getting lower casualty rates. Anyway, the discouragement that I was getting from the Jesus, it takes me an hour to play one side in one turn, that's fading away during these periods. I'm up to 130 now, and I basically, haven't had to sit over the board for large half-hour or longer periods for a while now. And it's giving me a chance to kind of recharge my batteries as well as the batteries of the units on the field. As the stasis pushes us a little bit further through the Confederate side of the turn. Still nothing happening. The problem is there's this sort of Damocles sitting over my head right now. At any moment, things could get really intense. Anderson comes flying in. We get a big battle. Longstreet starts moving. Big stuff starts happening, but that's going to take a little longer to develop. Once 5th Corps starts rolling, which isn't soon, which isn't now, but it's fairly soon, we're also in that position with the Union being able to start the battle big. So with my solo turns, it's okay, although there's a little bit of expectation. For example, if my wife and I are going to do something, or if I have something I want to take care of, or when I was working, if I thought, I got time to do a quick turn right now, I might find that, oh shit, I'm in a bigger thing than I expected, and I either have to, pause player turn or, change my plans at that point, which could be painful. On the other hand, largely right now, it's just oh shit, it's going to take longer than I thought, I won't get to go swimming right away. I'll have to go a little later, whatever. But it does make it hard for me to plan in that sense. But if you were playing in an opposed game and you're like, geez, we got a half hour left, we got enough time to get another turn in, and it ends up being a 2-hour turn, that would really suck. And it would really suck because, you might not be able to come back. If you did pause mid-turn or something, you might not be able to come back easily. It might be a week between plays or something like that. And with a game this big, it's kind of annoying to have that. Geez, I have no idea how big the turn's going to be. Obviously, you can plan for it and say, well, we got about a half hour left. Let's not start one because it could get bad, obviously. And it's not that big a deal to break a little early. But on the other hand, you're talking about a commitment of an hour or two versus, 10 minutes a turn, right? That's a big difference, and it's hard to plan around that. Whether or not the eventual attack would have been a wise or unwise thing, Hill's force here, I think coming up against this Union forces right behind the forest line right here, I basically have to close, probably can't. Anderson's the only division that can, which is why he got positioned there. But certainly this was terrible for the Pender division. There's only 2 brigades even with any real existence at all left, and this is just a sharpshooter, and this is a couple strength points. Everything else has been dissolved. You got all the leaders down here waiting to get a command back at midnight. Lee's got to be pretty pissed about now. On the one bright side, Johnson over here has regained attack effectiveness, but I kind of don't see what the hell I can do with him at this point. And certainly not him alone. I need to get all of Ewell's command into play. For Longstreet, it's taken too long. 5th Corps in place. They've got defenses running down, a little bit of a flank turned down there. It looks hideous. It looks hideous for the Confederates at this point. I think the battle's actually just about over. I don't think we're going to make it to a third day. I probably will, but I actually at this point with Lee, I'm looking at, Jesus, maybe we should just pull out. We can't face this. I think I may have gotten a little confused and reported some things at 1 something when they're 2 something. We're at 2:45 right now. Recent discussions probably on this video have been at post 2 o'clock. There may have been some at 1. I don't know. There's been a lot of turns with nothing happening. But I know that I got kind of confused as to the hour. Anyway, it is all happening now. Anderson pushing forward, not actually engaged yet. Didn't really want to walk up into fire without getting a decent opportunity to fire all along the line. Might be able to charge and break through. We'll see. Or I might just move to 1 hex and exchange fire. Both are viable options. There's advantages to charging, but only if you can get density. And I don't know if I have density in many places along the line. I want to be able to hit all along the line as opposed to just try to puncture in one place. Because Longstreet's also moving, he's going to position himself back here and launch an attack. This could end up conflicting directly with 5th Corps' orders, which are to move against Longstreet. And we might end up with a mess somewhere off there over near Warfield's Ridge or whatever. We'll see. That's about it. Some successes over here. We can see we punched the Union forces back a little bit there. I kind of want to be doing something with relation to the game or with regard to the game, but I don't want to play even the Union half turn, which isn't going to be terribly hard, but the Confederate one following it will be where things get ugly, although I do have a bunch of breastworks to put down, so it's going to probably take about 15 minutes or so. But I don't want to expend the time on that. But I do want to talk about, I kind of cheated here again in terms of interpretation of orders. Longstreet had orders to launch his attack from the vicinity of the peach orchard. Well, the peach orchard is now covered with Union troops. He received these orders. He's clearly had scouts available who could see the peach orchard area. So he knows that that's occupied, and he can't just park, there and launch his attack from there now. So since it's vicinity, and when I wrote out my individual orders for Hood and McLaws, and these guys are kind of following them. They're semi-attached, although there are no attachment rules. Following, they're leading. I set orders to go from Tossel's Woods and Warfield's Ridge. I feel like that captures the intent of the orders under changing circumstances. Should that be allowed? If you're too harsh with things like that, this game just becomes silly. You have to allow some leeway in interpreting your orders, especially at a point where you're just getting them and the commander does have the knowledge of those orders don't exactly apply. Well, what does that mean? Should I just sit on my ass? Should I march up to here in column and try to take this, deploy and then try to take it, requiring initiative rolls and all kind of stuff like that? Or am I allowed to write my orders kind of on the fly, given that it is the point at which I'm allowed to write the individual orders? And I took the latter option because I think that is the more reasonable. And you're going to have to approach certainly any ESIG game with that kind of feel. How reasonable is it? I think you have to approach most war games that way. Unfortunately, some don't really open themselves up to that. Some are kind of opaque in terms of what's going on, etc. If they're not showing you the mechanisms and you can't relate that to reality easily, you can't guide what those mechanisms are supposed to mean. So, for example, might be a great game. Yeah, I think it is, actually. No Retreat. I don't feel like I can tinker with that at all. I feel like that is a game that's meant to be played as written. If there are exploits in it, well, it's no longer a good game, If there are things that break the simulation completely, it's no longer a good game. It's a good game only because it manages to provide that the storyline, the narrative of the battle in a simulative environment, along with providing a very rigid system of rules in game. And you could say the same with the coin games. You couldn't start tweaking the rules with those, right? Because you don't have enough understanding of what all those mechanisms mean. And CDGs, most of them, you can't really play with them much. But something like this, damn man, I can sit back and say, that's not reasonable. I can change that easily. And a lot of the older style games, not just Hex Encounter, you can do it with area games like Empires and Arms too. You can kind of configure them to your liking so easily. We got to babble on for a while without actually having to play anything. I really think that I don't play war games in order to move the pieces and have what's going on usually, although I do enjoy that mechanical aspect at times. I enjoy the reflection over the game. I enjoy looking at this situation, especially from the Union side at this point, this nice arc, and then the Confederates positioned, and kind of looking at it as a map, with the specific core blocked out on it as you would in a historical text or something. It's an interesting view to me, because what I'm doing is I take all the details of a game like this, and I think there are more than enough in this particular game. But and then I abstract them away into that view that I want to see, right? Well, is that the view I really want to see? No, because if I play a game that, has a couple counters for a core or something like that, even if they're big, wide counters trying to look like those grand tactical planning maps or campaign maps that I'm used to seeing, that would be completely pointless to me. It's the fact that my brain is actually processing all this individual information and then generating that abstraction that I think causes the pleasure. If I don't have all these pieces, if I just have those big elements on the board, it just, I don't know. It's like there's something missing, even though I want to see it in my mind often without all the detail. I want to see it much cleaner in my mind. I want that process of abstraction happening in my head. I don't want the abstraction to be in the design itself somehow. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I kind of shy away from games that have too much simplicity on them, that present not enough of the detail. Midst of a long player turn here as the Confederates long street sliding around here, and I'm about ready to move Anderson in. He's got to attack. Keith, totally useless. In the woods here, he can't move forward. That's okay. I mean, his units are holding a flank, and that's good enough for me. Okay, but some thoughts that I had earlier are starting to come to the fore here about, okay, why do I say attack is more advantageous? Because here's the thing. If I start marching in here, I get shot immediately with about a 50-50 chance, right? I'm at range 1, 50-50 chance I lose a strength point. No other bad effect. Then I get to shoot back immediately. And I shoot back immediately with these larger units, which are probably going to cause at least a strength point. It's more than 50%. Good chance of 2 strength points. I might lower the enemy line if I'm at the right edge point to a point where it's no longer going to have as good an odds. Of course, this might lower my units, but that edge is smaller. And perhaps more importantly, I get a morale check. The morale table can cause more losses than the combat table if the units are poor morale. If they're good morale, they'll probably stand pretty sturdy. If the units are wrecked, though, if I have wrecked units attack, obviously I won't be moving within 1 hex, but if I have wrecked units attacking other wrecked units, I can probably bust my way through them with that first shot. I can probably turn them around, or if I'm facing really poor units. But basically what it's going to come down to is day 3, whoever launches the attack has an advantage. Their wrecked units against the enemy's wrecked units, or weak units against the enemy's weak units, are going to be more effective on the attack than they would be on the defense in clear terrain. Obviously, once you start talking about Cemetery Hill, you're talking a whole different kettle of fish, or Culps with what's now, they've got breastworks all along there now. That becomes much harder. And if you have defensive terrain, in fact, if you have, a little bit of thickets that make it hard to charge close, and they're up on a hill like Seminary here, we saw that caused problems too if there's artillery even in the front row. Okay, so then there was another side to this that I wanted to get into, and I can't remember what the hell it was. Fuck me. Yeah, alright, I had something else and I don't remember what it was. Maybe it'll come back to mind. And this isn't what I intended, but the Cowardly Legs Barker and the sort of localized routes that can occur there definitely weaken the defenses compared to where they were back in the CWB side of things. So, not only, do you get this first shot at the morale, but you can also kind of time it, and you have, this is another one that I wasn't really thinking of, you have more control over where you're hitting with the attack. Yes, the defender can rearrange, in the basic understanding of the rules, the defender can rearrange the alignment of his force, but there's only so much you can do. If you're defending a stretch across here and you see the attacker swing around this way, you have to try to pivot your whole force. You may not be in the right location for that. And if you're playing with the line of the defensive orders type rules, whatever they are, the defensive boxes, you have to roll an initiative roll or whatever to refuse to reorient your command in any degree. So, to some extent, there's a a flexibility to the attacker being able to hit a flank that the defender really can't respond to quite as easily, because the attacker's writing orders based on the defender's static position. The opportunity for the charge. We had one here. I broke through the first hex, knocked this guy back. This one I was hitting in the rear. You would think that would work pretty well. I did damage, they didn't. Even though I'm hitting in the rear, that doesn't change the table, the opening volley table that I'm facing there. For a follow-through charge, basically I moved 1, this would be 2, 3, 4, 5. I could have just run right through the Union line. You don't pay extra for a charge, you just pay the terrain that you're entering. The problem, of course, is you're likely to take a hit each time you charge. Maybe 2. And that's going to slow you down, and your leader might get shot off and whatever. You might not make your entry cost. This guy made his entry cost. He did his damage, but he didn't cause a failed morale check for the unit under there. So mixed, mixed bag. But the charge gives you an additional option if you don't like the move up and fire. On the disadvantage, of course, now you're facing, hey, sometimes units don't make it in at all. If you've got something like this Woods line, some of Anderson's division, 3 Bs in a row failed their rolls. That's only on a 1 or 2 do any of them fail a roll, but boom, boom, boom. But now I got this guy, I can try to move up and put into position and try to bust my way through, because now because I hit, now I've got another morale penalty to all the units around that space. I should have a cowardly legs marker there, but I can remember. And I got the same kind of effect back here when I shot forward. So these guys all fired into here hoping to dislodge him. The morale table is very unforgiving. Small modifiers can boost you into the range where you start taking losses and throw the whole command into disarray. So it's of some value, to get that first shot in just because of that. Now, healthy units are less likely to get wrecked, though, or to get routed or even displaced by the morale table. But there is a trade-off. I get the first shot on it. My opponent's going to get a shot back at me next on his player turn, and then I'm going to get one on the next turn eventually as we wear down. But that wearing down, the opening fire makes up for that. It really does. It's a fairly simple way of generating the losses that often happen without as many checks and without as many die rolls. So I see that as kind of a smooth thing. The only problem is those edge cases, for example, when one wrecked unit is hitting another. I think there's a tiny little advantage to the attacker, but I'm okay with that, because if the defender is defending flat ground with no real advantages, and I consider this Woods line an advantage, you kind of deserve what you're getting. You should find something that gives you some advantage. Either these slopes, which give you the heavy slope lines, which give you a morale bonus. So then, you're going to take less losses over the course of the fighting. Obviously, if you can get a wall or breastworks, that's huge, because that not only gives you the morale bonus, but it also gives you a fire, an advantage in avoiding the damage from fire. So a lot of nice factors there. Got to add the attacker's morale into this attack. Not sure he would have failed. I'm going to leave it be. Too late to change things. We're having more failures towards advancing, though. And this is the net effect. A big halt all along here. Some others didn't go forward too. Up here, Posey, Perry. Posey was actually able to launch an attack on the rear of this. Not terribly effective. You see, that didn't break it, but a lot of the stuff in the orchard here, that got flung back and then got fired on by artillery. I'm done counter-battering. I want to kill units. Artillery's a good target, but I had a bonus to hit as well as to affect, in terms of the morale table, disorganized units. So I shot them up, because line of sight doesn't matter. I'm more than 5 hexes away. I gotta remove these. I'm always forgetting them. I catch them during the other player's turn, usually on the Union side, because they blend in too well. We got Union counterattacks punching the Confederates back, especially here at McMillan's Woods, where the Confederates actually pushed forward and we had that close combat and everything. These pretty much dissolved. Over here, not much is happening because the Confederates didn't engage. The Union doesn't have orders to move forward. They could, I guess, if I decided that was a valuable perimeter, but I'm not too concerned with that. I'd rather let them make the opening move into there. Even though I'm making these statements about, hey, you got a defensive advantage, well, that's somewhat mitigated. There's a wall along parts of this, although I don't think it reaches down here. I don't think I took it into account when I did my fires for the Confederates. And then the bigger and more important thing is 5th Corps has started moving. Now, only people who got their orders completely is the 2nd Division, and they're starting to swing their way out. This is going to be kind of an interesting situation, knowing the orders as I do. These guys are going to swing around this way. Meanwhile, Longstreet's pulling around. If this tail end, the 3rd Division, doesn't swing up on the ridge before Longstreet mainly passes by, he's going to position himself here and launch towards their rear. That's going to cause some serious issues. I'm going to require, an initiative roll or whatever to reface more than, say, one brigade to try to prevent that. So, as 5th Corps slides in this way, 1st Corps is going to whip around and hit them from behind. That's going to cause a mess, and I think can't be good for the Union. The thing, though, is Confederate 3rd Corps here. I should use the names of the Confederate commanders because there's only 3 and it's easier to remember. Hill's Corps is not in good shape at all, and they've pretty much petered out their attack. They had one good division. They've taken a lot of damage on it. They've got no opportunity, to have a reserve because the only division they could have put in reserve, actually they have 2, Wilcox and Wright. They could have put either of those in reserve. Sorry, that's not right. Yeah, Wilcox and Wright, two brigades that the division could have put into reserve, but that's their fighting power, right? Posey and Perry were both damaged, so they couldn't go into reserve. 5th Corps has some things in reserve, so here I've got Weed down here with a brigade in reserve, and I'll generate brigades in reserve for the other 2 divisions, just so that they have some capability to maintain an attack. That's what I wanted to talk about. I know it revolved around that. Yes. So an attacking force could leave one unused division, one unused brigade in a division, or one unused unit if it's a small division, in reserve, and never pull it out. And that unit could just be a wiped out mess, which could just keep coming and coming and coming. So it's not going to stop the fluke stoppage roll. Because one of the potentially evening out, mitigating factors to the attacker being able to punch his way through a defender with 2 wrecked units, 2 wrecked commands, is that the attacker will probably will end up with a fluke stoppage because he probably doesn't have a reserve if he's battered force. But if you do keep a reserve, and this might make sense on the last day when you're trying, I fear gamey techniques here, and I probably won't play to do them, but I could see gamey activities to try to get Cemetery Hill. That is the key victory condition here. If you can get Cemetery Hill, and if you can kind of I think it's the Tandytown Road, not the Baltimore Pike. If you can interdict the Tandytown Road, you can get a draw as the Confederates. But if you can get Cemetery Hill, there's the gatehouse there. That is the one location. You hold that, you win. Period, the end. And for the Union, if they hold that and keep Tandytown Road from being interdicted, they win. Well, whoever's got kind of the last attack can make that attack more impressive if they have the ability to meet their reserve requirements. If they can meet their reserve requirements, even if they got wrecked units, assuming the enemy's pretty badly mishandled as well, they can punch their way through because of the low morale and the first fire that the attacker usually actually gets, because if this doesn't generate morale effects. That's a pretty key edge event to this game, and I would strongly suggest never playing this particular game with anyone terribly competitive in mindset, who's trying to use the rules to the best of their advantage without any thought of what is behind them. The gamey person. Stupid discussion over on BGG that I moved over to my forum to talk about, because I really wanted to discuss it, but it's amazing how many people see, if it's in the rules, it isn't gamey. Well, bullshit, man. I mean, a designer can design a gamey game intentionally, one that's not so much a simulation, but more a representational type of situation. And they might, Afrika Korps is a good example. It's not, completely without, I got it up here somewhere, there it is. It's not a game completely without historical simulation qualities, but when it comes down to it, it becomes a game about the geometries of the hex grid and how you can use that in a way that is very gamey in and of itself. The actual design is. I would contend a lot of the more competitive games, because they have to nail everything down specifically and can't take care of all the possibilities, tend to be more gamey. Now, players who come from that tradition and then walk into a game like this, where you're intended to kind of have a certain willingness to play reasonably, that can cause a problematic situation where you're looking at it and saying, well, okay, so if I'm the last guy who attacks the hill, I keep my reserve, I fight it out, make sure I've got both our armies pretty battered, but now I've got the last lick to try to take it, and that's good, because there's a slight advantage to the attacker in that situation. Maybe. I don't know. The defensive bonuses of the hill probably make up for any kind of attempt to do that, but I could see trying to get a little bit more of an edge by misusing your units. You wouldn't use them historically this in a real life situation this way. But on the other hand, it is a game. Worst comes to worst, hey, you've done something clever but unbelievable. You've kept an entire brigade out of the battle for no good reason, and everybody else is happy in that division is happy because of it for some reason, and that is pretty hard to accept. But yeah, it has that effect on the play. But you can enjoy that as much as you can enjoy any other gamey game. If you want to play that way, that's fine. It's not what the designer intended. The designer intended for people to try to play this in a realistic manner, not to try to break the system, to try to come up with an advantage that the rules allow. Once you get to a certain level of complexity in a game, you can't nail everything down. I can almost assure you of that. And if that's the case, well, then it becomes, the only games where people don't have the opportunity to misuse the rules are very few. They're very, very carefully conceived simulations that are fairly small and that aren't a gamey design in and of itself. So, for example, CDGs, they are almost all gamey designs, okay? You either accept that or you don't, and I'll gripe about it. This is not a gamey design, but it allows players to perhaps mishandle the rules to their advantage. And you could say that's gamey gameplay. Do you want to blame someone on it? I don't care who you blame. You're maybe playing the wrong type of game if you feel that necessity to try to twist every little advantage out of the rules you can. Now, if you notice an advantage to the rules and then can justify it to yourself and your opponent in a debate, hey, it's historical that I should be able to keep a unit hors de combat because, and I give some example of a particular unit that was not involved and that somehow they cheered everyone up. Say Stonewall sitting up there at at Bull Run, you know. You could argue that that is a case where, because he was doing nothing, and essentially in reserve, he somehow rallied the army. I don't know if I buy that, but you could try to make that kind of argument. And, you know, if you really believe it, I'll probably give you the benefit of the doubt on it and say, fine, I don't agree with you and I wouldn't do that. And that's actually usually how I play these games, is I'll point out, you know, I wouldn't be doing that because I think this. And if they say, well, it's in the rules, I'll be like, well, okay. But, you know, sometimes the rules can't cover every situation correctly. Sometimes they're not going to handle things. And how do you want to cope with that, you know? Is your only guide to playing going to be, it's in the rules? Because if it is, we probably don't belong playing together. Probably. I'm not sure. It depends on the game, you know. If it's one of those really gamey designs to begin with, yeah. You know, if I've agreed to play that damn thing, I bought into that. But if it's something like this, there's a certain level of trust that you have to have in the other player's intentions and willingness to suspend the rules, or what the rules in their entirety imply in terms of possible advantages, etc., in order to have something of a better historical representation. Now, I did something gamey in this game, there's no question. When I moved those Union forces up to Seminary Ridge, because I knew Lee can't do anything about it, except for one thing. I've done that same damn maneuver in Terrible Swift Sword, Thunder at the Crossroads, and I think that's it. But, you know, the two big Gettysburg games that I've played, I do that same damn maneuver. It just doesn't work. Here, let me get away with something I like to try. 315, and much of the Confederate attack is pretty much petering out. I'm still not moving forward with some of these units. This guy, I chose not to. He was shaken. I didn't want to get him. I don't know. It doesn't make much difference because he would have recovered after the advance, but I've got supporting units that were disordered that I want to have moving forward with them. But these guys still didn't move forward. The likelihood of that is low. Losing Heath and Pender, they both have fallen out of the attack. They could rejoin it. There's not really any effect to that. Heath doesn't have the ability to close, and he has to in the woods. And Pender has almost nothing left. He's got 2 strength points here, and I think 2 there, and that's it. That's, you know, the main thing he's providing is this artillery support, which is still effective. He drove some Union units out of the way, pinned some guns down. Meanwhile, Longstreet is swinging around. You can see these guys are way up there near Little Round Top. If I was a clever person in writing my orders, I wouldn't be launching the attack, this supporting attack along the ridge, which is going to fail because, which isn't going to provide the kind of support that I need, because Anderson's division, our corps, is going to not be locked in combat for very long. I think, well, not Anderson's corps, his division is not going to be locked in very long, and it's not doing much. But if I did a marched up towards Cemetery Ridge, avoiding the enemy, that might serve a great deal of purpose, just gutting that internal section. Now, of course, as soon as that happens, there would be a whole collapse. The whole Union line could conceivably turn. It'd require initiative rolls and try to defend that. And very quickly, Meade could throw orders out. He's got a quicker turn radius on his orders and just destroy Longstreet from all directions. So that would be probably horrible. But part of me is thinking that would be kind of the cool thing to do, swing up. Even if I don't hit Cemetery, I could hit Culps from behind, and you know, if that coordinates with Second Corps, great and fine. But how could I predict that Hill would be attacking before Longstreet? I've got no idea on that. And I pretty much know Ewell's not going to launch an attack. He's still 2 divisions down over there. So he's not really got any opportunity to do so. Yeah, it looks like this video is about done. We're at 3:15. I'll finish the union turn on it, and then I'll send this one up. Probably can't tell from my orders, but they look awfully small. The reason for that is I believe very much in sparse orders. I just want to touch on this a little bit. This is probably violating line of battle's intentions with the orders. They tend to, although the ones given in the reinforcements are not this way, I get this feeling that you're supposed to give specific roads of advance, this, that, and the other. And then, of course, you can make rolls to change them. And what we're seeing here is I'm kind of figuring out my way with Longstreet as I go. That's kind of cheating, but I don't want the extra overhead of the orders. Am I cheating in the game? Yeah, I don't know. You know, does it matter? Not really. Not really. As long as I'm kind of consistent the way I play it, I think it's fine. It's not that I want this extra flexibility. It's that I want to not have to do all the work on the orders. And I feel like these still give me a pretty good direction. I'm not lining up every path, which can cause problems. I get traffic jams if I try to pre-plot all the road movement, and that is accurate in some cases. Bad commanders tended to order too many troops down singular roadways. But to tell you the truth, I probably get a more historically accurate number of traffic jams if I'm loose like I am here. If I'm too detailed, I'm going to get way too many. I'm just going to be lousy with them. You could probably say the same with OCS. You know, if I play an OCS game, I'm probably going to screw up my supply and not have what I need where I need it when I need it. That's okay. You know, it's best if I kind of play things by ear. As long as I'm playing both sides equally bad, I think it's fine. Okay. So you see the Union beginning to deploy their way out, with the pivot pushing the furthest. That second division, I don't know what they've kind of done. They've got a whole column here. I don't think they need a whole column in reserve. Yes, they do. They have 3 divisions there, so they need or 3 brigades in that division. You need a brigade in reserve. Some of the others don't, but they may when they come on the board in more depth. So over here, 3rd Division has the 1st and 3rd brigades of it. So I only need 1 unit in reserve right now. And likewise, I think 1st has only 2 brigades involved. Huh. No, I got 1, 2. Yeah, we better keep a whole brigade in reserve back here. Oops. Done a lot of damage right in the flank where we're hitting the hardest, but then up here also we're winning against Anderson on that side. There is very little in terms of the Confederate force. Most of it, a lot of units have fallen in there. The destruction of units, complete destruction, is higher in this game than in the CWB games, at least by my feel, my remembrance of that. Had some successful artillery fire back here up against the hill, as well as, well, some unsuccessful fire trying to suppress the Confederate guns. All right, this is getting kind of exciting. We're going to see how it plays out, but I've been having kind of an ache to do something else, so I may take a little break and play a Euro. I kind of don't want to because it's at an exciting moment. I was kind of thinking, well, I can hold off until the end of the day or whatever, or the end of these attacks at least. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, the advantage to doing it right now is I'll have a clean video, so I can just shoot through the Euro and then come back to this. But I think this may be too exciting a period for me to walk away from easily. Right then, up it goes. 3:30 is starting up.